You're listening to the Happier Marriage Podcast, and this is episode number 9. What we'll be discussing on this episode is why ignoring the pursuit of a happier marriage will cost you significantly. As you listen to this episode, approach it with an open mind and take an inventory of your own marriage to see if you're guilty of not seeking to pursue a happier marriage. Also, make sure you listen to the past episodes of the show, subscribe to the show, leave a rating and review, and bookmark this podcast as your top resource for insights on having a happier marriage. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Kingsley Grant, a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified relationship coach, and an in-demand speaker who have been married for over 3 decades with 2 adult children. I'm also the founder and CEO of Helping Families Improve, a counseling center that caters to helping families experience the life God intended for them to have. So how do we have a happier marriage where love, respect, and deep connection takes place? That's what you'll find out as you listen to the Happier Marriage Podcast. What's up, ladies and gentlemen of Happier Marriage World? I hope you're ready for another round of the Happier Marriage Podcast. This episode might trigger you because it hits close to home, but that is one of the purpose of this show, to stir things up and then take you in for a safe landing. So buckle up and here we go. As stated earlier, that this episode is going to deal with why ignoring the pursuit of a happier marriage will cost you significantly. And the first question that may come to your mind is this: why would someone intentionally ignore pursuing, seeking out a happier marriage? Now, I want to speak for the men for a second, for a few minutes here, because I know sometimes we as men, we don't see the signs as quickly as a woman does. And now may sound stereotypical, but please understand this. I've seen and worked with so many couples over the last several years. In my own studies and research, this tend to be the way it is. So I'm not going to shy away from making that statement because it may sound sexist or stereotypical or whatever else phrase you might want to use. Is just what it is. It's amazing how, because of being so politically correct and trying to be so careful in how we choose our words and what we say, it's amazing how we are now pressured to shift everything away from making statements that once were so normal to conversation. And now we have to change that because of the culture or getting canceled or getting attacked. It's amazing. But I find that it's interesting that this only seems to happen more so in the Western world than other parts of the world. Because other parts of the world, people have no qualms in being very specific when they're speaking about gender roles, speaking about what we would consider stereotypical, a husband role and a wife's role in the marriage, and how that plays the difference there. I was thinking earlier, I'm going to get back to what I started by saying, how sometimes we as husbands, we tend to miss the signs. We tend to be so caught up in our own world that we don't see sometimes what's happening in our own marriage, and things are shifting and moving and right before our eyes, and we don't see it, or sometimes we just don't think it's that important. We're taking for granted our wives and our wife, and so we then find ourselves almost in a place where sometimes it's too late. But going back to what I started saying earlier, how in parts of the world where people will give the roles, for example, a husband and his or her role. I was thinking just before I started recording this episode, one of the things I do as far as I would say a husband role, a male role, is that I take care of the outside of our yard, our house. So I'm the person that tend to get out there and do the weeding and the edging and the mowing and the landscaping and anything on the physical side. Now, is it that my wife can't do those things? Of course she can. She demonstrated her ability to do those things time and time again, right? There was a time when I could not, when I physically could not, because I had had surgery and I just couldn't do anything outside. I could not lift. I could not do anything. Let's put it there. And so what happened is my wife would pick up the slack and take care of things, both outside and inside. Amazing to see how tends to happen when you're called to step up, whether you're a husband or a wife, to do some things that you would not normally do. So I was thinking about this. I was going back in my mind to see if my wife and I had sat down and somehow talked about what roles we'll have, or did it happen over time in a more organic way? And I would say it's more the latter, more organic way. And even though today, as a marriage counselor, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as you heard, I work with both people who have been married and help people prepare for marriage. And one of the things I talk about is roles, and ask this question: how do you decide on what roles will be played in your relationship? Because I know sometimes some things are more instinctual for women. That's how it is. And they have a knack of seeing things that sometimes we as guys overlook. One of those things is what we're talking about today, and how ignoring pursuing a happier marriage could simply be one of those things. It's not that we don't want, I have not yet met a man who does not want a happier marriage. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons they're so unhappy in their marriage is because they want a happier marriage, but some things are getting in the way. Sometimes it's what they're doing. Sometimes it's what they're saying. Now, it can go both ways, right? Both a wife, she can also be saying things that is getting in the way of the husband who wants to have a happier marriage and is keeping both persons at bay. And that's another story for another time. But sometimes a husband, ignores pursuing a happier marriage because he might be simply ignorant of what's happening in the relationship. I see that very often. He knows something is off, right? He can tell, but sometimes he doesn't know what it is. And here is what happens sometimes. He doesn't ask. He doesn't ask. He makes assumption. Now, can that be also true of wives? Yes, it can be true. She can also not ask. She cannot make assumptions, or she can just begin to behave in a manner to simply saying, I'm not happy. Our marriage is not happy. And sometimes the husband sees it and just keep ignoring it. He keeps on stepping over it, walking around it. The things she's trying to communicate to him, things are not well between us. Things are not well in our relationship. But he may just, I say, what do you mean not well? I cannot tell you how many times I've had couples come into my office when I was meeting physically. Now I do virtual, as it's recording virtual counseling, and would say that I don't know what she's talking about. I don't see the marriage the way she sees it, right? Now, and sometimes, I have less of the women, the wives who would say that way, but mostly I find the men would say, I don't know what she's talking about. I think our marriage is great. I think we are just fine. As a matter of fact, he may have come to counseling because she dragged him, right? It might be because she felt that I needed to come because I want to save my marriage. And so he comes not as a customer, he comes as a visitor because he wants to say to her, see, I tried it and it didn't work. Or sometimes I find, which is on the rare side, I do find sometimes a wife will come and she will say, see, I tried. It's not working. We need to then pursue a divorce, if that's what she wants or if that's what he wants. But those things are also what happens when people are ignoring the signs, ignoring pursuing a happier marriage. And I don't think it's deliberately, right? Deliberately. Now, in some cases, there could be a deliberate attempt to sabotage a marriage because somebody wants out. And this is part of their exit strategy, is to create a chaos and tension and conflict constant in the relationship that one party would say, I can't do this anymore and have reasons to leave. So I know that happens in some relationships. But in general, most couples that I work with, I find that they possibly are ignorant of what truly is happening in the relationship. They have not really communicated. They really don't know exactly what it is. They know something is off. And that's why I think those who do seek out professional help, I just lift my hat off to you. I just applaud and commend you for making the courageous step, because you are simply saying, we are not able to see it. Let's get a third party. So I want to give you a big commendation on that if you're one of those people, which I think you are as you're listening to this podcast episode. Now, why then when it's ignored? Why when pursuing a happier marriage is not on the priority list of a husband or a wife, right? Why is it that is going to cost them in significant ways? Well, I want to share with you 5 areas that comes to my mind, because I think these are so important. I see them so often that I believe I put my finger on and say, hey, here's what I see and hear more often than not. So here are the areas I believe it's going to cost you in. Let's start with your health. Now, your health is very, very important. Now, when we talk about health, some people only think of physical health, right? They think about the pain that they're feeling in their body and so on. And that happens. There could be something in the physiology of your being where in a physical way, they're manifested, right? These issues that I'm discussing are showing up in a physical manner. I mean, sometimes it could be where you have, such stress in your relationship. So that would be more of a mental thing, right? So it's mental, but it can show up physically. These things I'm describing can show up physically in your relationship. So in the health area, I'm speaking about your mental health. I'm speaking about your emotional health. I'm speaking about your spiritual health. And of course, your physical health. Now, when you're ignoring pursuing a happier marriage, why is it costing you significantly? Because of the stress that's on your life. You can feel the stress in the relationship. And it's not just in the relationship. The stress is transferred to yours and your wife or your husband's, your spouse. You are experiencing that in your body. It's taking a toll on you. And if you have ever done a research or do a search on how stress impact your physical body, you'll be surprised. I have seen people show up to me who have gone to the doctor time and time again looking for something that's wrong with them. And the doctor was saying, there's nothing here. There's nothing that I'm seeing. And he or she will recommend and strongly suggest that person seeks out mental therapy. Why? Because he or she, the doctor, knows there is a stress that's causing these things to manifest in the body. And somehow, if they can de-stress their lives, then they're able to take care of this physical issue they're having. So stress impacts your health, your mental, emotional health, right? That comes from this. Also, as part of this stress part of this health area is fatigue, because a relationship is not in a happy place, right? When it's not in a happy place, it's stress, but also you're not going to sleep well. I've yet to meet, now there's some people who are so almost say narcissistic or just maybe an abuser. They can sleep on nails and not even care about the relationship. Now, there are always exceptions. There are those people who are that way, and I'm not talking to that person. That person has some serious issues, and you want to consider your marriage and get some help, obviously professionally. But the fatigue that comes, right, the arguments, the fights, those things impact your mental health. Your mental and emotional well-being is at stake. Anxiety, depression. You're now going to the doctor to get medication. I've had couples who said to me, or a spouse who said to me, I've never taken medication for anxiety until I'm now in my marriage. It's my first time ever taking medication is because it's since I've been married. Never had this issue before. What are they saying? These issues are coming up in their relationship. There's something off. And maybe one of the spouse who sees or hears that, of course, encourage, you need medication. You need to be on medication. That's the place that they go, not realizing that it's possibly because of their own issues, the things they're doing or not doing, that's sending that person into seeking medication for something that could possibly be addressed. Now, I'm not somehow minimizing medication, but I think sometimes we have an over-medicated world where everything is medication, and some of those things can be addressed without medication. Some of these things can be addressed without medication, and if we only look at other areas of the relationship. So health is one of those areas. Let's look at another area, wealth. Now, when I say wealth, I'm speaking about your finances, because what's happening is this: you are going to have a subtraction, right? Subtraction from your ability to perform and bring more finances into the family. You're not going to feel energized, and possibly you know you need to, but sometimes because of what's happening in your relationship, and if you're experiencing anything like anxiety or depression, my friend, you're not going to get out there. I have had people who are depressed from a relationship, from their marriage, where they can't get out of bed. They don't even want to go to work. I have people who would say, I only go to work because I know I need to and do what I have to do and no more. That person could possibly then not get a promotion because, of course, their performance is not what it's supposed to be. So financially, the family now begins to suffer. You're not producing as much as you could. You possibly is missing opportunities. You're possibly overlooking moments where, if you are an entrepreneur, for example, a business person, maybe a sales or person, you may be leaving money on the table that you would not normally do because you would have seen the potential, the opportunity to go after another sale, but you don't have the energy. You don't have the focus. You're not concentrating as you ought to. Why? Because the marriage is not what it's supposed to be. And you're not pursuing a happier marriage. Because again, even the energy to do that, and possibly you're not encouraged by your spouse, your partner, to even want to get a happier marriage. So it's costing you in these areas, and now it's showing up in your bank account. You begin to see you're spending more money taking care of different things, right? Probably not only medication, but you're spending more money trying to other pleasure or to escape things, right? Trying to escape things. So money is going out, but not coming in as much as it could. So because you're trying to find a way to feel happy and to address something in your life that needs to be addressed, but is not what it is you're going after. But you don't even have, maybe your spouse is possibly not being cooperative, maybe stonewalling. And by the way, if you ever heard about John Gottman, he done a study and he said, he calls it the 4 horsemen of apocalypse when it comes to your marriage. And he says there are some things, 4 things that he's seeing in his research where when he sees this in couples, he said the chance is 95% of the chance they will end up in divorce. And one of those things is stonewalling. That means you're stonewalling this person. You're not being forthright. You're not dealing with the issue. You're blocking even having a happier marriage. Again, as I mentioned before, it could be because you want a way out and your purpose of doing that, right? So financially, it's affecting your wealth. Thirdly, the family, right? Your children are feeling what's happening when your marriage is not happy. They are paying part of the price of that. So we call that collateral damage, because the children have nothing to do with between you and your spouse, right? But yet they're caught up in the middle. Sometimes a spouse will bring them in to try to use them as leverage to the other spouse, right? And so the family, so the wife or the husband, depends on who is ignoring pursuing a happier marriage. That spouse who's ignoring it, the other spouse who's a recipient, they are distancing themselves. They're probably doing things that you may not even notice. It's so subtle. They're more finding their needs to be met through their children or through For some, I've seen in both husband and wife, they resort to the bottle, having more glasses of wine or other alcoholic beverages than they normally would, right? They're upping their intake. They're trying to dull. They're trying to dull the pain, right? And so what happened in your family, you begin to notice, even if you don't notice, that's a pay where it's costing you. It's costing you your relationship with your spouse. It's costing you your relationship possibly with your children. Because as one child or your children see the spouse that possibly is wanting a happier marriage is not getting it, and the other person is possibly stonewalling or even using the other, criticism, or they're probably being defensive or any of those things, right? Then the children feels bad, and they may see mommy or daddy who's sad, and they want to take on and try to be the rescuer. I've seen even sometimes where kids become, we call it the martyr complex. They will martyr themselves. They put themselves in situation because if they're trying to see mom and dad be happier, in their mind, if they become a rebel and a bad, quote, air quote, bad child, then what happened is mom and dad has no other option but to work together to help solve the problem that child is causing. So that child is using themselves and putting themselves in a perilous situation where they could even endanger their lives or get the punishment for what they're doing, but they don't care. As long as they see mom and dad happy, it's a small price in their mind, is a price they're willing to pay. So it's affecting your family. Lesson number 4, your career. Your career could be at risk because you're not experiencing a happier marriage. Why? We have mentioned earlier the stress level. We mentioned earlier about, say, anxiety and depression and fatigue. We mentioned about the arguments and the fights, right? The lack of focus. We mentioned also the vices of alcohol or any other drugs. So those things, my friend, if you're resorting to any of those things to try to help you to feel better, then it's going to play out. Eventually, it's going to catch up with you when it comes to your work. So you may not be showing up on time. So there is now in your relationship, in your workplace, you are being late to work more often than not, or you're calling in because you're physically sick from the marriage, or you are taking medication and it's causing you to be drowsy at work. So your career could be at risk and your performance is now being affected. And guess what? Eventually you're written up. And secondly, or maybe eventually fired because your job performance is below par. Why? Because you're not experiencing a happier marriage and you're not pursuing that and making that a priority. And my friend, when you don't make that a priority, then it's going to show up and you have to pay in another area of your life. And the 5th area that I want to mention here that it will cost you significantly is number 5, is not true of every marriage situation, but I've seen where people turn to substance abuse. So, and here it is that an addiction, whether it's alcohol or drugs or pornography or you name it, right? It could be workaholism that becomes an addiction to work. So it could be of anything that is now you find yourself wanting more of that, spending more time and money and resources there. And now it's costing you because you have to pay for that addiction, right? Somehow, even if you're doing this addiction or behavior in a way where you're hiding that as well, because you just don't want anybody to know, it's costing you, my friend, because to work every single day to hide this thing that you're now doing is going to show up in your behavior. It's going to show up somewhere, and somebody eventually will find out. The Bible speaks about this. Whatever is in the dark will one day be brought to the open, to the light. And so that's one of the very thing that I kind of fear sometimes and keeps me as best as I can. And in no way a perfect husband. In no way say our marriage is perfect, because there's never be. Sometimes people hear this idea of happier marriage. They're thinking I'm suggesting perfection. No, Obviously not. Come on now. It's not about a perfect marriage. You'll never have that. So let's settle that right up front. You'll never have a perfect marriage. But can you have a happier marriage? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And this is why I'm simply saying when you ignore pursuing it and going after a happier marriage, you have to understand what is the opportunity cost. What's it cost to you? And it's going to cost you significantly in these areas I mentioned: your health, your wealth, your family, your career, and an area of addiction. These are things that, my friend, are prices that I don't know if you want to. I don't think it's worth paying, number one. And number two, I don't think that anybody can sustain paying this price. Something will give one day. And I want to make sure, my friend, you don't let that happen to you. So stop. If you're ignoring it for whatever reason, stop. Seek out professional help. Just truly being honest with yourself. Acknowledge what's going on. Recognize that, you know what, things are not well. And maybe you may not want to, because of ego or pride gets in the way. I'd suggest seek out, as I mentioned, a coach or a counselor and start there. If you feel like you can't go to your husband or your wife, and start with that and just honestly just say, hey, you know what, our marriage is not what it's supposed to be, and let's begin to put in place a way to work on a happier marriage, then my friends, you're going to continue to have more of the same. And I tell you, it's a price you're not going to be able to, it's a price too high to pay for something that could be changed and be otherwise. And here's where I think, and most important, I would say, seek God's help. Because God wants to help you. I mean, he really is waiting and standing by and simply saying, hey, I'm here. I'm here. I will help you. I will give you the wisdom. So if there's ever time that you need to turn, I believe, to a source outside of yourself, and in my world, that's God. And you may want to decide whatever you want to put there, but I would say turn to God and ask for help. This is a time. This is a time He'll give you the opportunity, and He'll help you to know how to approach this. So I would suggest that. So my friend, I would simply say this as we wrap things up here and coming for a landing, right? Your marriage does not have to continue being this way. It can be turned around. You can have a 180. And you heard me mention those areas, and I suggested what you can now do. So I would say begin the process. Begin today. Put something in play today, at least one thing. And I would even say suggest by starting at coming to terms and admitting there's an issue, there's a problem, right? Don't ignore the signs. Don't ignore what your spouse has been saying to you and see it as, oh, they just want to have a fight and pick a fight. No. See it as something, my friend, that is keeping you from a happier marriage. If I was to ask the question on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy your marriage is, where 10 is a happier marriage and 1 is the opposite, where would you say? Whatever number you pick, I would suggest this idea. What would you need to do to move your marriage from where it's at to the next number? What's the first thing you need to do? Start there. Start there. And that's how I want to land this plane. Start with the first thing you need to do and see where that takes you. Now, my friend, I want to encourage you as well. If you have a comment or a question about this, please reach out to me. You can comment anywhere you see this episode is posted on social media, or you can email me at podcast@kingsleygrant.com. podcast@kingsleygrant.com. And if you're on social media and want to find me at Kingsley Grant, just send me a private message if you want to. We can start with that. If there's a way I can either direct you or I can help you myself. And if you're listening to this podcast episode, well, actually, it will be after the fact. I'm doing a 5-day, it's called a challenge, but I call it a reveal. Happier Marriage Secrets 5-day reveal starting August 22nd to the 26th. So you might be listening to this episode after that is done, or midway. I want to suggest that you can still put your name on a waiting list, because I'll be doing that again. and you will be able to be notified when that time does come so that you don't miss the next one that I do. I'll cover a lot of these things you're hearing me talk about here on this podcast will be covered there. And then you'll also be given an opportunity to possibly work closer with me or have access to other things that I'm making available to help you in your journey. My friend, thank you for taking the time to listen. Thank you for being here. Remember, as I mentioned earlier, please review, give a rating and review to this podcast wherever you're listening. Subscribe to the show. And if you've missed any of the past episodes, please go back and listen to that. Share this with one other person. I will truly appreciate that. With that said, my friend, may God bless you. May God's face shine upon you. May he be gracious to you. May you know his peace, and may his blessing reside upon you and your family. This I ask in God's name, in the Lord's name, over your life and over your marriage. And until then, I'll see you next time on the flip side. See you then.